The 4th century marked one of the most radical transitional periods in the history of Europe. The now 300-year-old Roman Empire was about to relinquish its 1,000-years-long pagan tradition and replace it with a brand new one. Emerging from the lands of Judea, Christianity had spread like wildfire throughout the empire. This religion was not like any other. It had no tolerance of worshipping any other deity but the one and only Abrahamic God. Adhering to the strict religious code of the Bible and an idea of a messianic mission, its followers immediately became targets of persecution. Although the Roman Empire was notorious for its religious tolerance, Christianity proved too dangerous to be left to thrive freely. Bloodbath after bloodbath, the ruling apparatus in Rome would try to purge their empire of Christians. However, the vicious persecutions only strengthened the Christian faith and exacerbated its spread. At the turn of the 4th century, approximately 10% of the empire's population was already Christian. It is precisely then that one man would change the course of history forever. By the year 324, after decades of division, Emperor Constantine had united the empire under his rule. Once again, the Mediterranean world was ruled by one man and united in one state. The only missing part in the puzzle of total unity was one god. And so Constantine, already having considered Christianity for a while, made the crucial decision to embrace this new faith. This would send shockwaves throughout the empire. Many decided to convert with their emperor, however others resisted this blatant abandonment of a millennia-old pagan tradition. Christianity now threatened the very backbone of Roman identity. However, nothing could stop the tide of Christianity now that the emperor himself had converted. The ancient gods revered by the men who built the empire out of scratch were to fade into obscurity in less than 2 centuries. Following the death of the great Constantine, his 3 remaining sons divided the empire among themselves, like a family estate. It didn't take much before brother took up arms against brother, and 2 decades later the empire had fallen under the sole rule of Constantine's middle child, Constantius II. Power-hungry, cunning and ruthless, Constantius had single-handedly wiped out 2/3 of his own family tree. One of the victims of this purge was a man named Julius, the emperor's own uncle. Constantius found enough mercy in his heart to spare Julius's 2 underage sons. The younger of the boys, Julian, would eventually develop a deep passion for the social sciences. He would spend most of his life in exile in Asia Minor. Traveling from city library to city library, Julian would fall in love with Neoplatonic philosophy and the pagan past of the Roman Empire. Fostered by pagan tutors, Julian's admiration for ancient culture would eventually lead the young man to conclude that embracing Christianity is nothing more than a betrayal of the very values that gave birth to Roman civilization. In the meantime, Julian's brother, Gallus, previously entrusted by Constantius to rule Syria, was without much surprise executed by the emperor not long after his promotion. Following that, Constantius recalled Julian as well. One can only imagine the horror that was going through the young man's head on the road to the western capital of Milan. However, his fears were soon to be ended. Instead of doing what he did to his other cousin, Constantius assigned Julian to the position of Caesar, bestowing on him the responsibility to govern the rich province of Gaul. To Constantius, the bookworm Julian must have seemed like the best candidate for this position. There was no way his cousin, devoid of any ambition and knowledge of warfare as he was, could ever gain enough popularity to challenge him. Yet Julian soon proved that a philosopher ruler should not be underestimated. In less than 2 years, the newly acclaimed Caesar would surpass his cousin in military prowess, recapturing towns from the grip of the Franks and annihilating an Alemannia army twice the size of his near present-day Strasbourg. Constantius would not sit idle while his cousin scored victory after victory. The jealous emperor ordered Julian to send half of his army to the east to assist his campaign against Persia. Refusing to march all this way and abandon their homeland, Julian's soldiers would proclaim their commander as their new emperor. The situation escalated in the year 361, and both men marched against each other. In a stroke of luck, the pagan philosopher's rival cousin would fall ill and die before any encounter could take place, and thus Rome was once again ruled by a worshipper of the old gods. Knowing that persecutions only strengthened Christianity, Julian would battle this fate in other less open ways. The emperor knew that Christianity in the empire was divided. Each sect hated the other ones more than it hated the pagans, sparking confrontations between the different opposing groups of Christians, imposing heavy taxes on the church and forbidding Christian tutors from teaching the ancient classics. Julian embarked on a long journey of diminishing the cultural and intellectual influence of this new dominant faith. Perhaps the pagan emperor would have succeeded in rooting out Christianity had he not embarked on a campaign against the Persian Empire, only 2 years after his ascension. In 363, Julian would invade Mesopotamia with 90,000 men, quickly reaching the Persian capital. However, not long after, the Roman emperor would find himself fleeing from the army of King Shapur II. The Roman and Persian armies would clash in the vicinity of the border town of Samarra. There, Julian would be heavily wounded by a Persian spear, fighting on the front lines with his men, not even having the time to clothe in armor. A few hours later, the emperor would exhale his final breath, dying as he had lived, an idealist, nostalgic for the glorious past of a declining civilization. However, this is not how our story ends. Let us imagine a world in which Julian safely returns to Roman territory. A world in which the old gods do not turn their back on their last powerful adherer. Now safely in Roman lands, Julian negotiates a peace deal with the Persians, making sure to send lavish gifts to their great king of kings, Shapur II, ending 4 decades of Persian-Roman hostility. The philosopher king then returns to Constantinople, continuing his policy of diminishing Christianity's influence by promoting pagans on high positions, thinning the bloated, clumsy aristocracy, and imposing heavy taxes on Christian towns and institutions. However, Christianity had already taken deep roots in the East. That was not the case in the western half of the empire. Christianity was still seen as a threat by the majority of the ancient aristocracy of Italy, Spain, Gaul and Britain, and so Julian returns to the western frontiers of the empire, doing what he does best, keeping the Germanic tribes at bay. Julian establishes a new capital in the important city of Trier. Situated on the Rhine frontier, this shift of power to the borders allows the emperor to strengthen the defenses of the empire, making German incursions harder than ever. Decades of stable rule pass. While celebrating the 17th anniversary of his reign in the Eternal City, Julian receives disturbing news from the east. A massive number of Germanic Goths are fleeing into Roman territory in an attempt to settle. Despite the peaceful intentions of the newcomers, Julian is not one to tolerate outsiders. Gathering the western legions, the emperor marches to the Balkans and annihilates a massive but disorganized army of Germans. In the following year of 380, Julian campaigns beyond the river Danube, inflicting defeat after defeat on the Goths. Rising tensions with Persia convinces the emperor to appoint his 18-year-old son Maximian II as his co-emperor, giving him full control over the east. Raised in Constantinople, Maximian did not share his father's love for paganism. An ardent Christian, the young boy's ascension is well received in the Christian-dominated East. Maximian's rule is stable, and for Julian, this matters the most. The pagan emperor returns to his capital in Gaul, continuing the fortification of the Rhine frontier. In 393, after a 3-decade-long reign, the emperor dies. His younger son Julius II inherits the West. A pagan like his father, the ascension of the young man leads to a permanent schism between the Christian East, led by his brother Maximian, and the pagan West. Despite that, the brothers restrain from open confrontation. The following 5th century witnesses the arrival of a new formidable enemy. Coming from the mysterious flatlands of the northeast, the nomadic Hunnic tribes pillage the prosperous Eastern Roman Empire, extracting tribute after tribute. Their arrival had also affected the West. Many Germanic peoples who were driven out by the Asian newcomers attempted to cross the Rhine and settle into Western Roman land. However, the reinforced Roman defenses prevent the barbarians from reaching far. Only the poor and isolated province of Britannia forced to Anglo-Saxon sea raiders. Despite their differences, the two empires unite their efforts against the common enemy, and by the late 400s, stability is re-established. Once the mutual barbarian threat is gone, the two empires clash in a series of draining wars. On top of the perpetual fratricidal wars with one another, the Eastern and Western Roman empires are forced to deal with ever more dangerous enemies. Now united under the Frankish tribal confederation, the Germans strip northern Gaul from the empire. More vital than ever, Persia inflicts defeat after defeat on the tired Christian empire of the East. Then, when both ancient rivals expected the least, a new religion emerges from the deserts of Arabia, uniting the local nomadic tribes. Underestimating the strength of this new foe, the Christians soon lose 2/3 of their empire to the scourge of Islam. West and East are reduced to a shell of their former selves. However, the empires haven't lost their ancient fighting spirit. Although significantly smaller, Rome's last successors continued their existence for centuries, until, like all civilizations in history, they both fall. Despite their eventual dawn, the cultural and religious legacy of the two empires echoes in eternity. The old continent of Europe is unrecognizable. The pagan West and Christian East are cursed into a perpetual confrontation until the tide of time washes off the last remnants of human civilization. Thank you for watching, and special thanks to my patrons who support the channel.